Hello there.
Hi.
Welcome back to A Priest, a Deacon, and a Bottle of Whiskey, Part 2. So we're gonna start today with, as you probably know, we have two ordinations coming up. We have the Diaconate Ordination on May 14th. We have the Priesthood Ordination on June 11th. So Deacon Christian will be ordained a priest on June 11th. What's up in the air right now is we don't know if anybody's even going to be there, except for it would be myself as the seminary representative, the bishop, Father Nick Schneider, who will be head MC, the ordinans, and the word ordinan means the one to be ordained. So that'll be Deacon Marconi and Deacon Christian Smith, and then their parents. So 4 more. Are we 10?
3 more. Yeah, that's about 10.
Yeah, so we're trying, and then we'll all be in the cathedral together with the bishop. And we're pretty sure that's what's going to happen for the diaconate. We don't know yet. We're hoping not. But if it does, we will be live streaming. But what we thought we would do, is because we have one of the ordinans with us, is kind of go through the Rite of Ordination. So when you guys see it, and hopefully you can be there at the ordination. If you can't, we've already said we're going to live stream it. And when we live stream it, there's a bunch of integral parts of the liturgy, which makes it like a very long liturgy. I remember it was like 3 years ago, a good friend of mine, he brought his son, and his son was sitting, and we had just a procession, right, of like 60 priests, deacons, acolyte, the servers all in Catholic surplice, the bishop, and his son turned to him, who's, he's like 10 years old, he's like, "Dad, there's no way this is going to be an hour." So it isn't. It's, I don't know, what, 2?
They do a pretty good job of keeping it.
2.5.
But along.
There's a lot of parts, and so the Mass of the ordination looks normal until you get to after the Gospel. After the Gospel, there's the calling forth of the candidate, and so a deacon, the deacon of the Word, will call forth the candidate, and so he will say, "Christian Tyler Smith." Deacon Christian will stand up and he'll say, "Present." He'll
echo me.
Echo.
Behold.
And then he'll bow to the bishop and he'll step out of the pew. And they'll do it with Marconi too, and he'll step out. And then they're seated they're standing, and then there's this dialogue that happens between me as the representative of formation and the bishop. What's really interesting about this dialogue, the ordinan doesn't say anything. He just stands there while me and the bishop discuss this candidate for the priesthood. So we don't sit down and say, "Hey, Deacon Christian, do you want to be a priest?" He just is presented for orders. And then I say to the bishop, I say, "Most Reverend Father, Holy Mother Church asks you to ordain this man to the office of the priesthood." And then the bishop looks directly back at me every year, and it always freaks me out. And he says these words, because Bishop Kagan is the real deal. And when he says it, it's not just a formality. He's really saying it. And he says, "Do you know him to be worthy?" And then I, not the Deacon Margaret, I say, after inquiry, which is a very hard word, and I have never messed it up yet. Inquiry. Monsignor Tom Richter, at my first ordination when I was deacon, or when I was vocation director, he grabbed me from behind and he grabbed my shoulder. He's like, "Hey, Waltzy, inquiry. It's a hard word." And I just sat there
and
went
in your head ever since.
Over and over and over. And I can't wait until Father Dosh takes over and I'm going to do the exact same thing to him. But anyway, I say after inquiry with Holy Mother Church, and upon, it's a long sentence, upon recommendation of their seminary formators, I testify that this man is worthy.
Responsibility.
So
if I turn out to be a horrible priest, it's actually your fault.
It's on me. I got
a seminary.
That's important too. Like when I stand up there, this is not just a formality. There is something there's this principle in the church called lex orandi, lex credendi. The law of prayer is the law of belief. So when we're up there and we're doing these things, it's just not like an exchange that the bishop and I are having just willy-nilly. It means something. And what it means is that he desires to be a priest. But he doesn't ultimately get to make that choice. The church has to choose him. And that's why when the bishop looks back at me, he says, "Relying on the help of God, we choose this man, our brother, for the holy order of the priesthood." and then everybody says, thanks be to God, and starts clapping. And these two guys will turn around and just, well, probably maybe an empty church, but they'll turn around and look at the camera, and then everybody's clapping. But they haven't done anything, because the priesthood is a gift. It is not a right. It's not like a job that any other person can take on. It takes anywhere from 6 to 9 years of formation. And then out of that, the church all along says, yes, we choose you to keep going. We choose you to keep going. And upon ordination, we choose you for ordination. And then there's the homily. After the homily.
We've been doing this since like the beginning. Like the reason that's in there is because they were doing it like, from the beginning of the church.
Right.
They've always like required men who are respectable, men who the people like, and who they choose. There's always been that sort of like ecclesial element to it.
Well, even in the Acts of the Apostles, right, when they choose certain men to be deacons, right, or like I always think of it like, like it's you're having a dialogue with an apostle, right? The bishop is a successor to the apostle, so it's like me talking to Matthew, the apostle, and being like, look, we want this guy to be part of the ranks. And then he says, do you know him to be worthy? Yes, I know him to be worthy. He's a good man. Then yes, then we choose him. Then you'll notice that they use the word we. This is called the royal we, right? They're always using we because it's the symbolic of the bishop acting as his own authority, but with the authority of the universal church. So after the homily, then we have, I think it's the Litany of Saints, right? And you'll see them lay prostrate. Prostrate is when they lay face down on the floor, right? Symbolic of them laying down their lives for service to the church. And then they have the promises. They take their promises before the bishop. And my favorite one is the promise of obedience. Because people are always like, what's the hardest promise? You guys make these promises. Celibacy's got to be the hardest.
Celibacy, but
Celibacy's the hardest. Hands down, obedience. Now, praise God, we have an awesome bishop. And so it's easy to be obedient to our bishop. But it isn't always easy to be obedient, especially if you don't want to do something. If they send you to some ministry and you just have to say, okay. And that can be very hard on a man's ego, for sure. But it also makes life a lot easier, right? Because my life is not my own. And I just go where I'm told.
Yeah, God's will is very apparent.
Yeah.
Oh, the bishop says this? Okay, that's God's will.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful way of looking at, if we could get every Catholic on that like level, that would be a beautiful thing. The fathers of the church talk about the bishop, and the bishop being like the voice of God the Father, right? I mean, St. Ignatius of Antioch, right, was spoken that way. And so to see that the voice of the church and the voice of Christ are two voices when we're talking about faith and morals. And then so after the promises, we do the prayer of consecration and laying on of hands.
Which are the two essential things to be.
Right. So this is awesome.
Priest, yeah.
So when they do the laying on of hands, right, and then all the priests lay hands, right, they all come forward, symbolizing the unity of the presbyterate, which means all the priests of the diocese. And then you're going to have the bishop praise this prayer called the prayer of consecration. Really long, really beautiful. At the end of that, all the priests, they all whisper it under their breath. They're like, now it's on.
That's it.
There it is. He's now a priest. It's at the end of that prayer, that man is ordained. And then after that is the anointing of the hands, right, is symbolic of, because they're hands that are set apart, right? When anything is holy, right? It comes from the Latin word sanctus, the Greek word agios, and it means set apart. So when you consecrate something, it's set apart. When I consecrate an altar with oil, that altar can't be used for supper. It has to be used for the Mass. These hands then become used for, these are Christ's hands now. And it's very humbling. When they used to, in the persecutions, I don't know if you know here, the Cristeros down in Mexico, I had a buddy of mine in seminary, his great uncle, I think, was a priest during that time. And there was a huge persecution where a lot of Catholics died. And one of the things they did to the priests is they would cut off the skin of their hand on the palm, because this was what was anointed. And so it's kind of like a desecration of the holy. And so we take that very seriously. And you have oil all over your hands, and then you wipe your hands on what's called a maniturgia. Maybe you want to explain the maniturgia.
So It's just a simple cloth that the newly ordained wipes off his hands. But the idea and the longstanding tradition in the church has been that he then gives that to his mother, because, well, and then she's buried with it when she dies. And the idea is kind of that when she, approaches Jesus after her life, Jesus will say, "Okay, what have you done for me in my church?" And she'll hand him the Manutergium, saying, "I gave you my son to be your priest."
Yeah,
It's kind of her like ticket into heaven.
If only it worked that way.
Yeah, right.
My mom, as most of you know, passed away on January 12th, and it was kind of beautiful. She had him framed, and she was always so proud of him. And so my brother went and like busted the frame and grabbed him out, and then she would, if you saw at the funeral, they were both in her hands. Mm-hmm. And so it's very touching at the time, because on the Mass of Thanksgiving, so your Mass after you're ordained, is when you give those things to, and when you give them to your mother, like, it's really touching. And they also give to the father the confessional stole. So the first confession they hear, they wear the stole, and then they take that off, and that's given to the father, because the father is the one who administers justice within the family and mercy, and the symbolism of the confessional stole is that God's justice is mercy in a certain sense. And so those two things are given away. Then there's the vesting of the priest, and usually the parents will bring forward the chasuble and the stole, and then the ordinan picks somebody to vest him, which is kind of an honor that he gives, because this is the first time he's being vested as a priest, and a brother priest will help him be vested for his ordination. And then after that is the handing on of the chalice and the paten, which is symbolic of now, it's not just in the diaconate they hand on the book of the Gospels, because that's what you become, the herald of the gospel, and you can preach and all that stuff. But here, chalice and paten, because now you're confecting the Eucharist. Now you're celebrating the Mass. And then after that, they move, and they take the positions of concelebrants. And so your first Mass is actually not
the Mass of Thanksgiving,
which is the next day. It's actually the ordination Mass, in which you concelebrate. And then after that, they'll give first blessings. Usually, you have a church full, and so it takes 2-3 hours. But as I remember, my ordination it's touching. The people that come and kneel down before you to receive your first blessing is a really beautiful thing. So we're asking you for a lot of prayers that on June 11th, this man is ordained in front of his family, friends, relatives, everybody in that church. If not, we really invite you just to join in on Facebook Live, or I think on the diocesan website they're going to be live streaming, to pray with them and to be part of the ordination as Deacon Christian Smith and Deacon Mark Ani will become the two newest priests of the Diocese of Bismarck. Until then, we will see you. When we come back, our next videos, I promised to have him playing a little guitar on this one, which he did. Our next video, I'm learning some jazz riffs on the piano, and we're going to do a little solo combination. And that one we're going to do in the evening, because in order to loosen up the fingers and get the muses going in the brain of music, we want to just, have a little snort and really just rock it out.
A snort, really?
Yeah, snooter, snort, whatever you call it.
All right.
See you next time.